All right. Jake, can you hit those lights for me? All right, so we are in the first week of our series called Worlds Apart, where we're going to be asking some tough questions about life, about God, about faith, and even about science, and trying to see if they can maybe fit together, maybe they're not. Over the next probably about 5 weeks, we're going to be spending some time talking about this, and we're going to be talking through on Sunday mornings about some of it as well. So, when you guys think of faith and science, just honestly, for what you guys think, and maybe for what the world around us thinks, your schools, your teachers, do you think these two subjects seem worlds apart? Faith and science. Do you think they seem worlds apart? So let me ask, how so? How do you view them as worlds apart, or how do other people view them as like worlds apart, to where they're just not close together? They seem to be at odds with each other. What are some ways that they just don't seem like they connect at all? Not everyone at once.
They kind of have opposite views,
Okay.
and science is like based on facts, and like faith is based on like what you think or believe.
Yeah, that's a super popular argument within the world, right? I believe in facts, and science is based on facts. And then for somebody to talk about religion or faith, it's like, well, you believe in, it's a belief. It's not just facts. It's facts on one side and kind of a belief system, whatever it is, on the other side. All right, that was awesome. Good. Anybody else on how they just don't mix together?
Evolution.
All right, so it's evolution. You know, the Bible, the beginning of the Bible doesn't really talk about evolution that much. Like it seems that they don't go together. All right, good. Anybody else?
The Big
The Big Bang, okay, where everything kind of started and created. Good. See, most of you guys, when you come down to learning in science class about life and Earth and humanity, it can actually cause you to doubt faith. So maybe you've grown up within a faith system, believing in God and those type of things, and what you hear in those classes might actually cause you to doubt some of those things. Maybe for some of you, you're just even kind of exploring this whole idea of faith, and you're struggling a little bit with it because, you know, as you said, like it seems like there's facts on one side and faith on the other, and how do these two even mix? You know, maybe some questions that are rattling through your mind. Does evolution prove that God isn't real? Does scientific discovery discredit spirituality? Does scientific evidence prove that some Bible stories didn't happen the way the Bible said they did? Those are real, legitimate questions and real, legitimate problems as you're trying to think through it. And the question I want you guys to maybe be thinking through about the whole series, and we're going to put it up on the screen here. Can you, or let's see here. Can believe? I can't even read that. Hold on, can you believe? Like,
Can you believe in science and still have faith in God?
what happened?
You put Dad in charge.
The computer broke. I know we can't believe in technology, so.
That's a lie.
Isaac in charge.
All right. So, can you believe science and have faith in God at the same time? I mean, that's the real question. And apparently, I added an extra can. So, can you? But you know, that's a real question as we think about it. Can you actually believe science and still have faith in God? And most would say probably no. But let's look at that. You know, it feels like you have to choose between science and faith. And oftentimes what happens here, I have a rubber band. For those of you guys who would say you have faith in God, and for those of you guys who maybe are even kind of searching, trying to see, it seems like they're worlds apart. And the more that you stretch, it's like one's over on this side, and then if you really want to believe this, it starts to pull you farther and farther away from the other side, and it keeps going and going and going and going and going. And eventually you feel like it's just going to snap, and they can't hold each other up. And often it seems like science is trying to disprove God. We'll put that up on the screen for you. Often it seems like science is trying to disprove God. And if that's true, then it must mean on the other side that God must disapprove of science, right?
Well,
If science is trying to disapprove God, or it seems like that's the case, God must disapprove of science. And that's what we're left with, these two worlds that are miles apart. Now, this idea of conflict or worlds apart is not really new. It's happened for years and years and years. Where you have faith versus science. Sometimes you have science versus science, which you don't always hear about. And we're going to talk a little bit about that more in a couple of weeks. But how many of you guys have ever heard of a person by the name of Copernicus? Anybody ever heard of him? Okay, what did he discover? He did not discover Christopher Columbus. So he's from the 1500s. Copernicus discovered.
The
He's
theory
not really the father of science.
that all
Thomas?
planets revolve around the sun.
Planets revolve around the sun, particularly the Earth revolves around the sun. Now, I'm doing some research. Most of your textbooks and everything would just say Copernicus and his theories were very anti-religion, or religion and faith actually were very anti-Copernicus. And there was some elements to that. We'll talk about that in a couple of weeks. But how many of you guys knew that Copernicus actually had a deep faith in God?
yeah, you think.
Most of you actually aren't taught that in your schools. Copernicus, it was actually because of his deep faith in God that sparked him to try to take a look at the world and say there must be a natural order to these worlds. And as he started to look at it, he noticed that the sun and the earth and the rotation, and he's like, I don't think that the earth is the center of our solar system. I think that the sun is, and that we actually rotate around the sun. But it was because of his deep faith that spawned him into these scientific discoveries. How many of you guys have ever heard of this person in the 1600s? Galileo. Galileo is probably considered the father of modern science. Do you know, same thing as Copernicus, he actually had a deep faith, and it was because of his deep faith in God that sparked him to want to look at scientific discoveries. And yes, he had a lot of problems with the church. We'll talk about that in a couple of weeks. And the church had a lot of problems with him. We'll talk about that. But his faith actually motivated him towards science. How many of you guys, maybe this one's a little bit tougher, but in the 1800s, how many of you guys ever heard of William Kelvin? Anybody know what he's famous for? No, nice try. Good. Anybody else? Sure, I'm gonna go to Taylor. Yeah. Is it absolute zero? Basically down there. All right. Chemistry, temperature. Like he's basically the one that's discovered a lot of this. Do you know his faith actually motivated into the science field? And he was deeply motivated by his faith. Actually, my family and I were in Scotland, where he's from, and it's cool, kind of going around. They have Kelvin College, and some of the buildings are dedicated to Lord Kelvin. And what's interesting is seeing all of the religious symbols on the university, which kind of hints back towards this was basically what motivated him into science, and yet you go and see much of the university and it's absent and devoid of God. I bring all this up to basically make this point. Why does it seem like we have to make that choice today? For some reason in the 21st century, we've convinced all of ourselves that if we believe that we're a follower of Jesus, we need to be afraid of science, and that science is just too rational to line up with our faith of an invisible God. But here's the question I want to ask, and I apologize, we have static electricity going on, so that's why the screen's jumping in. But here's the question: what if you could really be interested in and okay with science? science and still hold to your faith? What if that was a possibility? Now that was a possibility throughout most of human history.
Wasn't it 1600s?
But what if we could still do that today? What if that was still a possibility? If you have your Bibles, turn to Genesis chapter 1. We're going to look at verse 1. So we're actually going to start all the way back in the beginning. All right? So Genesis chapter 1, we're going to look at verse 1. If you don't have a Bible, we can get one for you. You can look it up online. It's page 1. Start right from the beginning.
Alright,
All right? Genesis. So the big number is the chapter, and the small numbers are like the little paragraphs. They're called verses. So chapter 1, verse 1. And actually, in the Bibles that we have on page 1, it doesn't actually have the verse 1 because the chapter is right there. But let me, as you guys are there, just kind of keep your finger in there, and we'll talk about it here for a second. Oftentimes there's a disconnect between faith and science and how things work, and really, maybe you can tell me if I'm wrong, but it almost seems like in our world and as you're in your science classes and everything, the more things are explained, the less it seems we need God. So the more we kind of learn about the universe, the less it seems we actually would need a God, or at least that's the idea that is kind of out there. But maybe if I put it to you this way, there's a big difference between science and faith in the Bible. See, faith, the main goal of faith isn't necessarily to explain how. Most of the time we think about, like, when we're asking God, you know, hey God, I just wish that you could show me how this works or why all this is happening. And faith really doesn't center around everything to do with how. There are some hows in faith. I don't want to discredit that, and there's some big hows in faith. But faith isn't really centered around how all the time. Faith is about understanding who. When it talks about faith in the Bible, it's not necessarily all about the hows of everything that happens. It's talking about the who and understanding the who of everything that happens. The more you understand who it is, the more you will start to see how it works. And that's actually what motivated a lot of scientists. The more that they, back in human history, 1500, 1600, 1700, 1800, the more they understood the who of the universe, it motivated them to say, well, if he did this, how did he do it? And so they start to investigate, and then you see science kind of being born out of them. So let me ask this question. Where does the Bible start? With a how or a who? So if you have your Bibles, turn to Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. I just want you to read that for yourself.
Let there be light.
All right, hold on. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. Just read verse 1. Does it start with the how or the who? Or does it maybe mix even both of them together? You guys read it for yourself here for a second, and then I'll read it, and then we'll talk about it. Just verse 1. Just verse 1. Okay, who thinks the primary goal in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 is about how? Who thinks it's who? Okay, good. All right, let me put it up on the screen. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, for those of you who are here with us on Sunday, this is the biggest, if this is true, this is the biggest miracle ever.
Like the Big Bang?
Because basically it's saying the start of everything. And as you look at it, you might say, well, this is ridiculous. It's a fairy tale. The Bible doesn't prove the existence of God right here. How many of you ever heard of a man by the name of Albert Einstein?
I have.
All right. Okay, he's not alive anymore. All right, Albert Einstein, he theorized this, that the universe is made up of time, space, matter, and force. Yeah, you guys can see it on the screen. Now, here's the question. Einstein comes up with this, and it's widely accepted through science that this is what makes up the universe. Here's the cool thing about Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. Before science had even come close to discovering this, guess what it starts to show us? We'll put it up on the screen. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Go to the next slide. Alright, so in the beginning, time.
Heavens, earth.
It's talking about time there. God created the heavens, space, and the earth, matter. And then there's force, put specifically on there to where it's created. But here's the cool part about the force. It's not just a force of energy, it is a who that does it.
The force is God.
The force is, yeah, not just a random force of energy. It's not just like the Star Wars, how the
May
force
the
is
force
just in
be
the air,
with
may the
you.
force be. The force is actually personal. It is a who that steps in and creates. The Bible accounts for what we understand of our natural world with a who. Although science seeks to and often does a great job of explaining all the hows and its experiments and its discoveries and theories, they can't answer one of humanity's greatest questions. Did this all happen by chance? Am I here for a purpose, or am I here just going through my existence until the day that I die and it's all
Over.
meaningless? While science does its best that it can to answer our purpose, how doesn't answer purpose. Who does? The who of the universe actually then speaks in and can answer the purpose of the universe. So what if the purpose of science isn't to disprove God, but instead to teach us more about how he works? What if the purpose of science isn't about the idea of disproving God, but instead is to teach us more about how he works? Now, I know for some of you, you're probably sitting there just going, but wait a minute. Doesn't science disprove God? We'll talk about that in 2 weeks in a little bit. But science focuses on how, faith focuses on who. Alright, so what if science actually teaches us how and the who behind creation and put everything together? Now, maybe some of you are still skeptical. I get that. And that's okay. But just think about this for a second. When we look at our universe, there are lots of complex systems that hold it together. And all these complex systems have to hold it together for it to work. Do you realize that the Earth and the point of where it is, if it's just a few degrees out of its rotation of the sun, if it moves just a little bit closer to the sun, do you know the Earth becomes uninhabitable because of the heat from the sun? Do you know if the Earth just moves a slight bit out of orbit the other way, becomes uninhabitable because
It'll be freezing cold.
it's freezing cold? Like, this is just naturally accepted. But here's the thing. It's got to be perfect for there to be life. Absolutely perfect. There's no margin of error. And I'll just be honest with you. I struggle a little bit with the idea of something having to be absolutely perfect on millions and millions of different systems all at once for it to work, and it happened randomly by chance. When you think of the human cell, science used to put out this theory. It doesn't really put it out anymore. But it would just kind of say, like, the cell is the least complex organism that we have. And, you know, cells start to divide and mutate, and next thing you know, you have evolutionary theory and all of that. I want to show you a couple of videos about the human cell, and maybe you guys have seen some of this. But when you think about the cell, it's not actually a very simple organism, is it? The human cell is deeply complex. What's the static electricity diagram? We'll show you this video here. There's a couple of different videos, and I'll talk you through a little bit of it. Here, let's go ahead and put it out as we think about it. So this is the human cell under a microscope. All right, you have the nucleus there.
Ew.
This is where your genes are, and in order for us to understand it, they actually call it a library. All right, information. You have gene transcriptions to where they're actually transcribing the genes all together through this process. That's in every single cell that you have. This is a nucleus gateway, to where this gate actually opens and closes to allow different materials to come up and through, and the materials that they don't want to come through, they don't. Here's another one. So, anybody look at this?
Yeah, I
describe them? How do they describe them? As machines.
DNA.
You have billions of these molecular seeds, and what they're doing is they're actually coming through and copying your DNA so they can make new cells. Each one of your cells is doing this right now. Did you guys realize this? This is pretty cool, right?
That's not cool.
I know, it's kind of crazy, right? So this is real speed on how fast it actually works.
That's not cool. Is that fast?
It's working that fast inside of your cell every single time. I'm going to show you one more picture here. This is it's a protein molecule that actually works. It's called a motor protein. Have any of you ever seen a motor protein before?
No. Is it a protein bar?
All right, so here's what happens. You have these roads that are actually built up in your cell, and then actually after the roads are done, they disintegrate, and then they form new roads in different places. So every one of your cells has this. And you have this motor protein, and you can't really see it right here, but it's actually 2 feet that takes steps along this path, transporting different materials to different parts of the cell so that your cell can actually function. Now, here's the craziest part about all this. All this has to work perfectly for your simple cell to work. Is your simple cell very simple? Or is it deeply complex with everything that's involved with it? And here's the only thing that I want to try to draw out. Oftentimes I feel like it takes more faith to believe all of this happens by accident than someone saying, all right, I'm actually designing it to work this way. We have to use design language to even understand the cell. Gateways, machines.
DNA.
Well, DNA isn't necessarily design language, but motor. They call these motor proteins. The only way that we can wrap our heads around it is through design language, because it appears that there is some sort of purposeful intent with how these things are put together. And all I'm trying to say is, when we look at this stuff,
It's majorly disgusting.
it might be majorly disgusting, but maybe this was the perfect accident. But I have to be honest with you, for me, I don't necessarily buy that. And it takes more faith to believe that it's all an accident than it does to believe that someone was behind it all. And so Genesis points to what we already suspect as we're looking through some of this stuff. This stuff isn't random. And there's a who behind our existence. There's a who behind our existence. And you can believe in him while still exploring the how that science explains. You can still believe in him while still exploring the how that science explains. So we should embrace both the how and the who. Science can actually strengthen your faith in God, while God can use science to help you understand his work. In other words, if I can maybe boil it down to one sentence, this is what I would say. Science and faith can exist in the same space.
But you said it could.
We'll talk about that in 2 weeks. I know you're like 2 weeks, but we'll actually talk about that more in 2 weeks. Science and faith can exist in the same space. So how does this work? Do you just have to put them, we have to just put them in their proper place. As you learn science, explore the world that God has created. Find out more about how he works those things together. And for some of you, you might still be skeptical. And we're going to talk about, actually in week 4, as we go over this at the end of January, we're going to look at the ultimate proof behind the who in week 4. And why we would say, okay, you can trust the who of the Bible. Because without this ultimate proof, I would actually say you shouldn't trust the who of the Bible. But it's kind of the foundation of our belief system. So we're gonna talk about that in week 4. But you might still have millions of questions, and honestly, that's okay. God's not afraid of your questions. We're not afraid of your questions, and God's not afraid of your skepticism either. And so we want to have a space to where we can be able to talk, and we want you to ask those questions. We want you to be able to feel free, and that this is a safe space to talk through some of that stuff. We want you to be able to say, hey, you know what? That's maybe the first time I've heard any of this stuff, and I think it's a load of garbage, but I appreciate you listening. we want you to be able to feel free to be able to talk through that. So this week, I got a question that I want to leave you with. What's something that you've learned from science that can increase your faith in God? I don't want you to answer it now. I want you to think about it and answer it during the week. What's something you've learned from science that can actually increase your faith in God? Because most of the time when we look at science, we think they are polar opposites. But we'll talk through some of that here in the next couple of weeks. Here's what we're gonna break up into groups. For those of you guys who are in 5th grade, here's what I want you to do. Stay back here with me because we want to show you where you can go and what groups you guys can be in. But as we break, I'm gonna send you guys off to life groups and for you guys to be able to spend some time together, just kind of talking through this. We got leaders who would love to be able to answer some of your questions and then have some good dialogue around it. All right?
Wait.
Awesome. Okay, go ahead and split up into groups.
Orange is for blue.